In this episode, we discuss points in a continuum using the character Colin Robinson from What We Do in the Shadows. Welcome to the Bottom Turtle Podcast. Hello everybody, and welcome to the Bottom Turtle Podcast. I'm Dr. Shannon Ray, and we're joined by our co-host Oyani and Dr. How you doing, Oyani?
I'm doing okay, Shannon. What's up, man?
What's up? Nothing much.
I'm just thinking, I had a conversation with someone this past week, and she was saying how, like, the podcast, how we started off so formally.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, and I'm thinking to myself, like, yeah, we came up with that when we were, trying to, like, set up the podcast at the very beginning. But I feel like over time now, we probably want to switch it up because it seems like I feel like we've gotten so much more comfortable, recording this and whatnot. Like, starting it out that way just seems kind of, but I guess,
honestly, actually, it was funny because I was thinking earlier, I was like, man, I can say that beginning part in my sleep because I've said it so many times. And one of the things I actually liked about it is when you listen to this show, you know that they're going to be the first words you hear.
Yeah. I was thinking about that too. So I'm like, man, at what point does it become a style, though?
Yeah, exactly. It becomes what to expect when you listen to this show. I don't want to change it up now. I want it to be a thing. It's a thing, bro.
Yeah, but I like that. Yeah, man, my week was pretty chill. My siblings came to visit for a little bit, so that was fun. We did a lot of the typical tourist stuff, like what's that thing called, the Lincoln Memorial, and
you went to the Washington D.C.
Yeah, but
you should probably tell them that.
Yeah. Oh yeah, we were in D.C. My bad.
Yeah.
But typical D.C. tourist stuff. So that was fun.
Yeah, I saw that video your sister posted on Instagram of you guys all together. It looked like it was probably one of those what do you call those things? Those little videos that your iPhone. Does she have an iPhone? Like those little videos you make where you have a bunch of images and pictures, and then it adds music to it, and it gives you
like a reel,
slideshow.
Reels.
Yeah, like a reel. Yeah. It looked like she got it off of there, but it was heartwarming.
Oh yeah. They had. I mean, we had a blast. We haven't been in the same room like that for maybe 12 years.
Which sisters was it?
My sister in Canada and my youngest sister. She's in Harvard now.
The one she got into Harvard Law School, right?
Yeah, she's Harvard Law.
Yeah, congrats to her. That's awesome.
Oh yeah, she's enjoying herself more than I am. How young people are.
So she's is she already at the school? She started her first semester.
She started
already?
Classes and everything. Yeah, so she's having fun with it. Yeah, but we haven't all been in the same room together for near on 12 years, so it was and it's so surprising to see that the dynamic hasn't really changed much.
Dynamic. So I mean, that's probably a good thing. You always want something to be consistent as you change and grow, having some consistent, reliable data.
So we still just had our typical arguments, and both of them are very left leaning.
Oh, I see.
I'm not to say I'm right leaning, but I like to challenge the ideas and things like that. So
okay, that's what's up.
It was fun.
Yeah, my week hasn't been too eventful. Just standard daily life stuff. Work has been going well. I ended up getting that figure completed, the one I was talking about in the last episode. Got that completed. Wrote up a new draft that included that information. Sent it out to my colleagues. They're supposed to be reading it, and they will send me back some. Actually, we're probably gonna get together in a meeting and talk about how we're gonna change things, and then we'll probably go through a few more drafts of passing it back and forth, and hoping like within the next month or two we can have something that we can maybe something we can post on the archive, which is a free. It's a server. It's a website run by Cornell University, where essentially you can your scientific articles, you can publish them in a journal, and they'll go through the peer review process, and it's like stamp certified. This was actually checked to not be bullshit. But before it goes through that process, you can post it on the archive. And so there's typically a free archive version, and then there's a published version. And so hopefully within maybe a couple months, something like that, we can post the article on the archive.
Oh, I mean, and this might be a weird question, but what is there a difference in the quality of the material on the archive as opposed to when it's actually?
No, it's the exact same thing usually. The only difference is that in the journal, they'll reformat it into their LaTeX style, which LaTeX is like a formatting style to make it to where the papers look professional.
Streamlined, okay.
Yeah, and so they'll put it into their own LaTeX file, their own style, and sometimes that looks better. But you can always review
that before it goes out when they put it in that style. Or
yeah. They send you preprint copies, so you get your preprint, and then you look at it, and you're like, that's
fine. Yeah, I don't know anything about that, so that's
the whole process. Yeah, it's pretty. Nice. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
I remember honestly, when I was an undergraduate, it was one of those things where it was for me that was a stamp of.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, it was
for everybody. What are you talking about?
Yeah, you mean for every scientist?
I mean. What are you saying? Yeah,
I'm saying like one of those things when you're younger and you're thinking about, I'm gonna do this as a career.
Okay,
one of the stamps is like I wrote a paper, I did some research, I wrote a paper, I submitted it to a journal, and it got published. And so like I remember the first time that happened.
Type thing.
It's a milestone, yeah, and it was a really good feeling the first time I published a paper. Nice. Yeah, it's beautiful. Nice. So far I've never had a paper rejected. I'm not the most prolific author. I move pretty slow because I want to make sure everything's right. But once I'm ready to submit something for publication, I'm like, I will die on any hill. I can argue for a fact. I'm pretty confident that everything I'm saying in this paper is true, and I feel very confident I can argue for it. So
that's awesome, man. That's awesome.
Yeah, my advisor once he told me, he was like, he's like, don't be ashamed at the pace that you work. You work slow, but by the end of it, your work is very thorough. Yes. So,
as it should be. Yeah. We can make all kinds of tortoise and hare analogies from there, I guess.
Remember it's a marathon, not a sprint.
Yeah, not a sprint. Yeah, there we go. Yeah. Someone posted that this week. I think it was Gary V.
Gary V.
Yeah, he had that. Yeah, I was like, this is dope. I was gonna send it to you. I was like, you know what? Shannon already saw it.
I already saw it. Yeah. And that's the thing is, I remember when I was an undergraduate. I think I've used that exact phrase already once today. But when I was an undergrad, there was this dude who was out, like he was a senior. He was about to graduate, so I only went to school with him for one semester. But we were in the physics student room talking, and he pointed that out. It's like, when you're doing stuff like science and stuff, it's not you have to think of it as a marathon. Don't try to sprint. And I really listened to what he said and held that to heart. And I always just keep thinking that, man. As long as they keep letting me play the game, I'm gonna keep doing what I do
at my own pace. Yep. Because that's how you get your best workout.
Yeah,
and that definitely really matters. What else? We talked about that. That show, I'm not sure if you guys know, what's that movie called? What We Do in the Shadows?
What We Do in the Shadows?
I don't know if anyone's seen it. It's based on a movie. I think the movie came out in like 2014, I'm going to say.
Isn't it like something in New Zealand? I know it's like...
Yeah, it's a New Zealand movie. It's not even an American thing. It's a New Zealand movie. I think the director or one of the writers or one of the directors, he's New Zealand-ish. Is a New Zealander. I think that's what they're called. Yeah. New Zealander. Yeah.
No, they call them Kiwis, right?
I don't know, man. Look, I don't
know. I'm pretty sure that's what they call it.
He is from New Zealand. I don't know what's offensive or not. So he is from New Zealand.
Nah, I think that they'll be honored to be called that. I think that's like their thing.
Okay, well.
Yeah. I mean, watching enough Israel Adesanya, Dan Hooker, and stuff like that, they call themselves that. So.
Cool. But basically the movie kind of centered around these vampires who lived in, I guess they lived in New Zealand at the time, and just how they cope with like 20th century problems, pretty much.
Yeah.
So they made a series out of it, and essentially in the series they bring them stateside to Staten Island.
Yeah,
Staten Island, and so they all live in this house and go about their vampire shenanigans as vampires like to do.
So in the original version, in the other, fucking and effing. But what was it? In the original version, was it kind of a? Because this show is kind of a office style.
Oh yeah, the original one was like that too. The original was like that. Yeah, it was like
yeah.
that.
I love that show, man.
It's pretty much the same thing. I think the difference in this one, the movie didn't have Colin Robinson in it.
Oh, okay.
He wasn't in that one. He was a new addition to the thing, and I think it added so much to that show. I can't imagine that show without Colin Robinson.
Without Colin Robinson,
because
I love that
grounds the show. Like he kind of just really makes the show so much more relatable.
Yeah,
was brilliant about that character, and we're going to go back and really realize how great this character is in a few years. The moment the character was introduced, we knew exactly what they were talking about.
Yeah.
It wasn't I don't quite get it. No, it was perfect. The information was all there. It was like, here you go.
Yeah.
This
so
is
for
who
people
we're talking about.
Yeah.
And so for people who don't know, I guess Shannon can fill you in about this character.
So, and what we do in the shadows, it's about, it's in this world, every character is the exact literary version of a vampire. Turning into bad, sucking blood, can't go out in the sun. There's none of this Twilight vampire twinkling stuff. Yeah, it's like straight up literary vampire.
Classic vampire life.
Yeah, but they also have classic literary werewolves and all this stuff. And one of the characters is the one that sits outside that norm. His name's Colin Robinson, and he's an energy vampire. So that's why it's so great, because he is mostly just an average normal person who gets off by irritating other people. He's someone who enjoys spreading negativity to feel better about himself, essentially. And so this is a character that is largely not supernatural. I mean, in the show, he's supernatural, but the stuff he does, as Oyani was saying, is really grounded to just meeting someone on an average day who just, they're going to be negative that day. They're going to be spreading negativity.
Everything out of you.
Yeah. And I think that actually, like, in one of the episodes, he's a troll. He's like an internet troll. So just imagine that's like a perfect example of it. Someone who goes online. Yeah. Someone who goes online with the intention of just getting in a fight, getting in an argument.
Getting the rise out of people.
Getting the rise out of people. Yeah. And so that's what this character is. And so he's just basically an amalgamate of all these different person types that you'll come across in society that just seem to really get value out of sucking the energy out of someone else to make themselves feel better about themselves. And so he's an energy vampire. Yeah.
What was so great is when he was introduced and they talked about, I think there was an episode where they kind of showed him at his office and how he goes about his day and how he interacts with his coworkers. And you instantaneously understand exactly what they were talking about. You could probably almost picture people at your job who you knew. This energy vampire. Oh, I know that guy. And, So,
I think that the character they introduced, the Evie, the emotional vampire.
Yes.
The one that is, she's a type of energy vampire who's always focused on pity. She gets pity to feel better. So she's the type of person that, everyone has to know this person. And like listen to Joe Rogan, he talks about them a lot. It's like the type of person who always finds themselves in circumstances that are not favorable to them, but they're always complaining how it's someone else's fault or, it just happened to them. Things aren't fair, and they're always, and so everything's like, they're just kind of stuck in that mindset where that's everything they're focused on. They're always focused on this negativity. And so this is an emotional vampire. And so what I like about this show is when we use the term vampire to refer to these people, we are pointing in the direction of things that are consistent with a vampire. And so when Colin Robinson is juxtaposed to actual vampires, you can see how the concept of vampire can manifest itself in reality if you project out the supernatural stuff.
Yes.
Yeah. And that's why I love the character.
Which kind of ties into what we've been talking about for the past 2-3 weeks about spirits, to where, when we use that word, when we point at the word spirit, we essentially are able to like move your mind into a certain space of ideas. As this is where we want you to be thinking about. And then we went through and then we took out the supernatural part of it to kind of break it down and show you how these things are related to this other thing. But essentially we're still working within the confines of spirit, which is where we're pointing at.
Yep. And the point is that words mean something. Like within a metaphorical structure, words are like pointers. They point to concepts. And when you say, for example, with Colin Robinson, when you use the idea of an energy vampire, you refer to a person like Colin Robinson as the energy vampire, you're not calling him an angel. You wouldn't use the word angel to describe this person. You wouldn't use the word, comedian to describe this person. You're using a specific word so that your mind conjures, like you're using the word vampire for the specific reason of making someone's mind go into the configuration that conjures concepts and ideas surrounded around vampire.
Because I'm pretty sure if we're calling him an energy angel, it will be a whole other concept we have in mind the moment you hear that word, energy angel. You're not thinking of someone who is sucking out energy. You're thinking of someone who's giving energy at that point. Yeah.
And in fact, to your point, if they named him an energy angel in the show, but he was acting like an energy vampire, you'd just be confused. Yeah. Like, why would you call it that? That's not that word doesn't point in that direction. And the thing is that one of the things about this idea of pointer is that when you're trying to conceptualize the concept of something like a vampire, then you have to start thinking about what is the true essence of that term. Because how many vampires have existed in TV and popular culture that don't fit the exact literary form of vampire? How many vampires like daywalkers? So like, oh, this is a vampire, but it can go out into the day. Or this is a vampire, but it can't turn into a bat. There are ways in which you can strip away traits of a concept and still have it be a valid representation of that concept. Like, it's still valid to call Colin Robinson or people like Colin Robinson a vampire, even though he's not like the literary vampires that he lived next to in the show.
Yeah, and like to your point, you said, words have meaning, and the weight of these words and how we choose to use them, essentially it guides how much information you're even able to impact to someone you're talking to. Like, so in design, this is a problem that we run into a lot, because you start to think, who are these people who I'm communicating with? And what words could I use, or what imagery, what colors could I use to essentially guide them to be thinking in this space? If I'm using, if I'm creating like a brand and I have like a pig and I have fire imagery, behind a pig, automatically you're already thinking, barbecue. You're exactly. So that's that's exactly what it means when you say, words mean things. People use this a lot, but it's actually true, because it helps guide us in the space of ideas to kind of know, what we're talking about, what we're looking for, or what I want you to be, what imagery I want you to have.
And this is the important part. When we say words mean something, we're saying that they mean something objectively.
Yes.
Words, like and this is something that I always like to say, is that within subjective frameworks exist objective truth. Meaning that when I say the word octopus, you don't think dragon. Yeah. And so within that system of thought, like Oyani was just saying, you have the pig and the fire, and without even knowing, he just said those two words, I automatically thought barbecue.
Thank you.
And so it objectively pointed me in that direction. Like, another example I use in the outline, and don't get upset because we are both black, but if someone comes up to a black person on the street and calls them the N-word, that's going to elicit a different response than if you said excuse me. So these words have objective they point in objective directions. They change the universe when used objectively from one state to the other. Like, if I ask you to hand me 7 of something, you're not going to hand me 23. You're going to hand me 7, because we both objectively know that 7 points over here, not over there. And it's the fact that you can, and this is why I try to use things that are so separated from each other. Like, if I'm talking about pickles versus anime, when I say anime, it doesn't make you think pickles.
How do you come up with these ideas?
I'm just coming up. I've come up with better ones. I'm just trying to pick two things that are so far removed from each other that when I use this word, I'm
thinking about anime. When I say pickles, you cannot possibly be thinking about anime when I say pickles.
I mean, you could be. Someone might have made an anime about a pickle.
Pickles, I don't know.
And then you could have just watched that show, and then someone says animated and makes that could happen,
But at the very least, what it's done though is it's reduced the space of ideas that you have to search in.
Yes.
Even if you're that one person who has that experience of this anime with that pickle in it, at the very least, you're not thinking about all animes.
Yeah.
You're not searching through all animes and all pickles and all vegetables. No, you're searching. Yeah, so if you're that one person who knows that anime, that's great for you, but you're not thinking about Naruto.
Yeah. Exactly. Yep. And speaking of which, I'm wearing my Kakashi shirt right now. It's funny you say that. Yeah.
Oh, okay. You guys can't see it, but yeah.
Yeah, it's a shame. It's a nice shirt. Got it at Walmart. Sometimes Walmart comes through. But yeah, sometimes they do. I walking through Walmart, I saw that shirt, like, yep, I'm buying that shirt.
But I mean, when we're talking about this idea, of words, and I don't know if this is gonna make the main cut of this podcast or not, but think about a phrase like defund the police.
Oh shit! Yeah, probably not.
No. But I mean, not to say that I lean anyway or either way, whatever. I'm not gonna sit here and act like I have researched the nuance behind the
whole situation surrounding
situation or whatever. I don't know. But my whole point is, if we conjure up that phrase in itself and we say to someone, defund the police.
What do you think they're gonna
we know where it's pointing though.
Yes.
You could make it seem like there's an explanation behind it or whatever it is. That's fine, but at the very least, we can agree that it's a very ineffective communication. Period.
Honestly, I think that needs to stay in because I think that's actually a really good example.
It really is.
If you were just in a vacuum. If someone just showed up in a vacuum, not knowing what's going on,
with a placard,
said, they knew what defunding meant, and they knew what police meant, and someone came to them and said, defund the police. They're not going to think all the other stuff that people are saying that it is. Yeah, that's exactly it. Yeah. And so what it is that within subjective frameworks exists objective truth. I'm pointing over here, not over there. But the problem becomes is that even though you have objectivity, there's always room for a miscommunication or an error. And so one thing that I think is really important, because I was actually having a conversation with Eunice about this yesterday, it's the history of the word objective and why that word is problematic for a lot of people. Like, I think there's going to be a lot of people, maybe some people who listen to this and are like, oh, there's I think there's a contingent of people who don't accept the idea of objectivity or that objectivity exists or that there's anything as objective truth. Yep. And one of the things when I was talking with Eunice is that the problem is that objective truth, as they understand it, is connected to the idea of absolute truth. And so I think the problem has to be that you need to separate these two things. There is no such thing as absolute truth, but there is something as objective truth, meaning that when you have a metaphorical structure that imbues meaning on words, so that words point in one direction versus another direction, when you have a structure like that, for it to point in a direction, you need to use concepts. So there are concepts within the metaphorical structure that when you arrange them together, like symbols, that when you arrange them together, point in one direction versus another. Mm-hmm. But the problem is that to have those symbols have meaning, then you have to just explain those symbols with other symbols. Mm-hmm. And then you have to explain those symbols with other symbols. And this is the
crossword puzzle problem all over again, guys.
Well, it's the infinite regression problem. This is why you can never reach any bottom, because you always have to explain one thing with something else. Yes. And so within a structure, you can give more symbols to point in a specific direction, but there's always going to be a degree to which it's not absolutely well defined. Mm-hmm. You're always in a state in which things are well defined and not well defined. Because again, when we're saying the word vampire, are we talking about energy vampires? Are we talking about literary vampires? What exactly are we saying? And then when we point in the direction of vampire, you have to imagine that vampire is like a point, and then there's a neighborhood around that point of concepts that are consistent with the idea of vampire. Yeah. And so because you have this problem to where the more constraints that you give to point in one direction versus another, it may reduce the size of the space, but you can never get that size of the space of ideas that are consistent with the constraints. You can never get that to zero. You can only get a set of things that are outside of the constraints and a set of things that are inside the constraints. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so like you were saying, like this ties back to the crossword puzzle thing, if you want to go ahead and elaborate.
Yeah, because like when you, like you were saying, you know, when you imagine you put together these words and they're supposed to mean a certain thing. Like, for example, you could find a clue in a crossword puzzle that goes, you know, 4-letter word for mutiny or something. And then now, you know, in all the space of all the words now, I'm looking for 4-letter words that's associated to mutiny. And then if you go further down and create another, if you say you eventually get whatever that word is and, you know, you put it out there, think about it as, you know, when you want to form another word, you have to link it up to the other one now.
Yeah, which is another constraint.
Yes. And so they're all tied together, and it starts to build this constraint to where there's just these words is what fits in there. So there's the, you know, the stuff that's inside of it, and then there's the stuff that's outside of it. And going back to the Colin Robinson thing we're talking about, you start to see that there was no question in our minds or the minds of, you know, the writers of that show when they introduced this character. They knew exactly where they were trying to guide us to look.
And they knew that people would automatically relate to the idea this is how the concept of a vampire manifests itself. Like, given all, like, remember, there's a point that is vampire, and then there's a set of ideas things around that include things like supernatural vampires, but it also includes non-supernatural vampires, like energy vampires. And when you were saying before about the crossword puzzles, like the way to conceptualize this again, imagine, like we were saying in the spirits episode, when we were talking about the inconceivable state of Buddhahood, imagine you start off in the inconceivable state of Buddhahood, which means that you are not conceptualizing anything. You have full potential to conceptualize anything you want. And then someone suddenly says, okay, we're going to go from anything to 6-letter words. Suddenly, that one constraint takes the space of all things, and now it's pointing in the direction of 6-letter words. And 6-letter words is objectively different than 2-letter words. And so now you are objectively in the space of 6-letter words, but it excludes things that aren't 6-letter words, but everything that's a 6-letter word is consistent. So that consistency is the space to which someone can be uncertain. And then I apply another constraint, 6-letter words that are associated with mutiny, for example. And then suddenly, bam, it collapses into a smaller space. Mm-hmm. And so now you're pointing harder. You're pointing harder. It's harder to mistake, to come up with a mistake. And so when you have these metaphorical structures, these symbols are the things that create the constraints. They create the constraints, and they point in a specific direction. Objectively, they point in a specific direction, but they can't point absolutely. It's never a single point. It's always a set of things that are consistent with the constraints, and a set of things that are not, and a set of things outside the boundary that are not consistent with the constraints. And that's what you're left with whenever you're dealing with a continuum. And what I've noticed a lot is that I think a lot of confusion in discourse among people comes from the fact that people do not understand how continuum work.
Okay. Yeah. Go ahead. Explain that to us.
So when trying to understand a continuum, you have to understand that given a number line, so let's just start off with an example. Given a number line from 0 to 1, within that number line, I can try to designate a point. Like, let's say 0.5, 0.53. Okay, so now I'm pointing at 0.53 as opposed to like 0.1. I'm pointing at 0.53, but for every digit past that 3, there's a bunch of other digits in which things are not defined. So now it's like, okay, I'm in this interval of things that are consistent with 0.53, but all of the things that are inside that interval are consistent with that constraint data. And so, okay, let me give another constraint, 0.531. And now I've gone to a smaller scale size, 0.5314. I've gone to a smaller scale size. Every time I add a new digit, it shrinks the interval of things that are consistent with that data. But the problem is that in a continuum, that goes on to infinity. Yeah. If I give you 20 million digits that designate a point, there are an infinite number of digits after that point that are not well defined. And so because of that, in a continuum, to point with infinite precision, to actually point in a direction with infinite precision, you need infinite data. You need infinite structure. You need infinite data, infinite structure. And so even if we're trying to use a metaphorical structure to point at a direction, if we want to point at one specific point to which there's only one thing, we would need an infinite amount of structure to point in that direction. And so there is no absolute truth. There's only a precision that is given, and then you have things that are consistent with the constraints of that precision, and things that are not consistent. Are outside of it. That's the best you can do. And this is why you have to differentiate absolute truth from objective truth. Because objectively, when I place those constraints, I'm objectively pointing at 0.531 or whatever. That's objectively true. But it's not absolutely true because there's always a degree to which in which things are not well defined. Yeah.
And I think that, this idea of being able to understand, what qualifies as objective truth, or even if you don't understand what qualifies, like how to search for it, how to read it and understand it is useful, especially now when we go about our day-to-day lives and we we get all this information online, like these videos we watch or these news articles that we read. We should be going through and trying to really break it apart to say, what really is the objective truth in here. How much of whatever information is being packaged and handed out to me is inside of this constraint and it's outside of it. How much of it am I like extrapolating from other sources and pulling it inside of it? This is all of it. I'm saying, hey guys, point here. This look over here. These are all the ideas and concepts or maybes and what ifs that fit into this. But then the moment you start to go and then pull things from the outside of that constraint to fit in, you're starting to break the model already.
Yeah, and I think to say that, I don't know, that might be confusing a little bit. To say that a little more clearly, it's a matter of, and this is something that I've started doing, go into any comment section of any video on YouTube. Or any video, any comment section anywhere. Okay, within that comment section, you're going to have people who are looking at an event that occurred. Or they're discussing the video, for which they're the comment section. And you watched the video. So you know what constraint data is inside the video. And so now let's say there's an argument about interpreting the video or saying that this is more likely than that. And so you're looking at the comment section and you see two people have started an argument with each other. And so when you're looking at this argument between these people, they start constructing objective data about who said what when. You know that at this, you can look at the order in which things are said. Okay, we started off with this data in this video. Now they're discussing the data. This person first started talking. This person started talking. And so there's objective data. And so when you start to actually look at what people are saying, you can start saying, well, wait a minute. What you're saying, there's nothing in this video that constrains you to be able to make that claim to that certainty. There's nothing here that suggests that this is what happened versus that. And you can actually see in these sections, like you can look at the data that consists there, and you can start to objectively analyze who is full of crap and who isn't full of crap, because that data just doesn't exist. It's not there to constrain for you to claim that.
It's almost like, imagine if you saw a video online of a dude eating a pickle and just walking on the side of the road, just eating a giant ass pickle and he's just eating it and pickle juice all over his face, whatever he's doing. He's enjoying his pickle. It's a nice afternoon, whatever. Yeah. And then this video is posted online and everybody's like, why is this dude eating a pickle on 97? What's going on?
Yeah.
In the space of all the ideas of all the reasons why this dude could possibly be eating this pickle on 97.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
There's several explanations that, we could kind of like just stretch out and will still kind of fit into the constraint of a dude eating a pickle on 97. Or it could be, go ahead.
Or I was gonna say like for, I think the one of the things you're going with this is like, all right, all you have is the data of this dude eating the pickle 97 and walking down the street and getting on his face. And then someone comes along and goes, that dude is eating the pickle because he just murdered a cat.
Yeah,
and it's like there's the constraint data that is the video. There's, unless you have some other data somewhere that you want to share with us, there is nothing here that constrains the space to say that that's exact. Now, he could have, there's an infinite number of things that could be the reason why he's doing this. Unless you get more constraint data to say, oh yeah, there was a video like 2 minutes later of him strangling a cat.
This was a celebration.
I love cats,
routine,
by the way.
All kind of things.
I love cats, by the way. This guy, he just can't enjoy a pickle unless he knows that he murdered a cat that day. Like, right, that's before. Just without that, he might as well not even eat the pickle.
We don't know that from the video. All we know is the dude is walking a 97, eating a pickle, and we can extrapolate. He was hungry, he's just coming back from the grocery store. All those are still within the realm of, this fits in, but then, he just killed a cat. Exactly.
Yeah, yeah. The constraint data is just not. There's not enough data. Like it's that video is like 5.31. It's like 5.312, and then he killed the cat. He killed a cat for eating a pickle. That's like 10 digits down that haven't been defined. You're like that 15th digit is definitely 7. It's like, what? How do you know that?
How do you?
There's
know
no
that?
constraint data for you to know that the 10th digit is 7. It could be anything.
Yep.
And that was a real roundabout way of explaining this, but I like it.
But yeah, and it just gets you to start to really pay attention more to, when you use words or when you try to explain concepts to people, as much as you definitely have to think about the audience, who's this person I'm talking to, and how are they going to receive this? But at the same time, you're packaging information, handing it to this person.
Mm-hmm.
There's only so much room for interpretation if you're pointing in this direction. This is where I'm pointing at. Let's go watch a UFC fight. I'm not thinking tennis.
Exactly.
No,
exactly.
I'm thinking two people fighting in a cage. Now we could talk about who's fighting, what time, what day, all of that. All that is in there, but we're not talking about Serena Williams. Absolutely not.
If I ask you to hand me 7 of something, you're not going to hand me 23. If we both have the shared mutual information of the language that imbues meaning on the word 7 on the number system. Like, this is objective. And yeah, I think that one other thing is to kind of bring this idea of the continuum. I feel like typically I explain that better, and I'm not sure if it's been clear as to the explanation. But one of the examples that I like to explain is that instead of choosing a specific number, let's say that you have the interval between 0 and 1, and then, let me see. So you have to think of the idea of a point. What is a point? That is the question that needs to be answered. What is a point? And what I'm trying to say is that in a continuum, there are no points. There are only sets of things that are consistent with the constraint data. And the size of that set, it depends on the amount of precision data that you give. So the more digits that I give, the more that point on that set on a continuum interval shrinks. Each digit that I give shrinks that size. But the problem with this continuum thing is that the size of that set depends on your relative size. So, for example, if I am giving longitude and latitude coordinates to direct someone at a certain location on the Earth, and I give it with the precision to which a human would be certain, that's enough precision for a human. They're going to go to this point. They're going to dig up the treasure. They're there. But then imagine that I give those same coordinates to an ant. For that ant, because it's so much smaller than a human, that's like an entire world.
Amount of space.
That's a huge amount of space. And so what I would have to do to direct an ant is I'd have to give way more digits of precision on the scale that's on the scale size of the ant. And so what you have is that whether or not something's big or small is all relative. It depends on a relative size difference. And you have to imagine that if I'm at a fixed size scale and I start giving precision, I start giving digits on a number line, and I'm at a fixed size scale. As I give more digits, that thing's going to shrink from my perspective. But now imagine that I'm shrinking at the same rate at which the precision is being increased.
Yeah.
Now suddenly nothing is changing.
Yeah.
Nothing changes. And so this is how you have to think when it comes to a continuum, is that constraint data can shrink things to it may look like a point from your point of view, but for an ant, that's an entire world, an entire manifold that exists. And so one of the things that to really bring this home is the phrase, everyone's life expectancy goes to zero on a large enough time scale. On a large enough time scale, everyone's life expectancy goes to zero, because when you're looking at the existence of like a human, 100 years, and compare that on the time scale of the lifetime of the universe, that is going to shrink to a point.
It's almost like we die as soon as we're born at that point.
Yes. But on our time scale, 100 years is a decent amount of time. And so this is how continua function. And the problem is that in this space, in the space of a continuum, to point in a direction hard, like I'm really pointing here, I need more constraint data to exclude more things.
Yep.
Yeah, and there was something else. Oh yeah, and so another point is, and this is going to be a point that's important later on in the podcast, is it's the idea that as human beings we are the same. And so this idea of a point starts to get into the question of what is sameness? What does it mean for something to be the same? Because now whether or not something's the same depends on how much constraint data I give. So, the constraint data that excludes other things, then everything that is not excluded is the same with respect to the constraint data. Everything inside is the same. They may be different with respect to each other, because if I give more constraint data, I might be able to distinguish one from the other. But with any given constraint data, that is what determines what something is the same or not. And so when you are trying to discuss whether something is the same, you have to give relative scale sizes. And so when I'm saying that humans are the same, like we're all the same, what I'm saying is that when you look at the space, the structure of all configurations, let's just say all minds, all configurations that are in the state of mind, that have mind, all configurations that have mind in the universe. When you look at human on that scale, then that's going to include reptiles, it's going to include octopi, it's going to include anything you can imagine with a mind. And so on that scale, the human is just a single point. It's a small point. And then you can go to an even larger scale of all configurations. Now that human point has gotten even smaller. So from that perspective, it is just a point.
It's like when you say all cars.
Yeah,
like when you say cars, like when you're talking about cars and you use the word cars, we automatically are talking about a set of Subarus and SUVs and sports cars and trucks, and maybe not even trucks, let's just say. But eventually when you start to go further out and say, you know what, all things with engines. Now we're talking about airplanes, we're talking about tractors, we're talking about, and then you go all things that can move or whatever. Or you can go even lower and say all, SUVs specifically. Now we've shrunk that down again and excluded them. And for all intents and purposes, objectively, all SUVs in that constraint are the same.
Yes, they're the same.
SUVs, yes.
And that is the degree to which where you're pointing is not defined. That is the degree to which things are subjective. That is the degree to which if I use this constraint data, someone will be uncertain to what I'm talking about. That is entropy.
So imagine if you told a friend of yours that, hey, can you go to the store and get me some cereal?
Yeah. They can come back.
If he comes back with a Coca-Cola, of course no.
Your friend
but
doesn't know words.
If he comes back with Frosted Flakes,
Captain Crunch,
and you wanted friggin' Captain Crunch, you can't be too mad though.
No, you can't be mad. Yeah,
you can't, because again, you were pointing but you are not pointing with as much precision to say, you know what, I want something sweet. I want a sweet cereal.
Yeah.
Automatically, in all the space of cereals this person can select at the store from now, it's been shrunk down to maybe 4 or 5 of them. Okay, these ones are the sweet ones. If he gets you Frosted Flakes over Captain Crunch or whatever it is, well, you know, and you can't really blame him.
Yeah, and this is the point. It's like you were saying with the cereal, is if I just say cereal, then all cereals at that store, that is the entropy. That is the degree to which you are uncertain. That is the degree to which it hasn't been well defined. And as we were saying, if I go from cereal to sweet cereal, I have reduced the entropy. There is less uncertainty that will occur, that I will get what I want. You've just reduced it, reduced the uncertainty. And this is what entropy essentially measures, or especially when you're talking about thermodynamic entropy, because in thermodynamic entropy, we explain that it's called the Boltzmann entropy. We explain that in terms of microstates. So we look at the number of microstates that are consistent with macro data. And so one of the examples that you see in like a real basic thermo textbook, like one in my undergrad, for example, is I have 3 coins, a nickel, a penny, and a dime. And I flip each one of them, like I flip all of them in order. So I flip the penny first, I flip the dime, and then I flip the nickel. Quarter. And so, given that flipping, they could all land heads. They could, the first one can land heads, the other ones land tails, or the first and the third can land heads, and the second one lands tails. So each one of those are possible outcomes of flipping these 3 coins, all these different sequences. And say instead that I don't want to know the information about the specific sequence. I'm only concerned with how many heads there were. So I'm trying to say, okay, all of the sequences for which there are, in which 2 of them land heads. Well, that includes heads, heads, tails. That includes heads, tails, heads. That includes tails, heads, heads. All of those are consistent with the constraint data. And the constraint data is how many heads. That's the macro data. But once I have that macro data, the multiplicity or the entropy associated with that is the number of sequences consistent with that macro data. That is literally thermal entropy. So this is what it is. You have the constraint data. How you have 3 coins, you flip them. You have the constraint data. How many of them turn heads? Oh, well, that points at the ones that have 2 heads. It doesn't point at ones that have 1 head. It's definitely pointing at these, but it can't point at a specific sequence. That is entropy. Yeah. And we're dealing with this on a continuum scale. And what I've noticed is that, like, there's a really good example is I was on the Sam Harris subreddit, and someone posted an image of 3 women in bathing suits. And in the first image, there's like so you have to imagine there's 3 women on a boat in bathing suits, and the picture is edited such that there's a hole in all the locations in which it's clear that the women have bathing suits on. So everywhere there's a bathing suit, there's like a circle covering a bathing suit. So when you're looking at that image, it looks like 3 naked women, because all of the all the parts of the picture where there's a bathing suit has been removed. So you just see skin and 3 women. And so you would think that this was an image of 3 naked women. But then when you include the entire picture in all of its context, you see that it's actually 3 women in bathing suits. And the point of the picture was to say, this is how people lie to you. They remove certain context and certain data and then only present you with this data. And now they're lying to you because now you have an image of 3 naked women there when in fact these women are not naked. And so this is one degree to which when people are arguing with each other, they will look at their own position and their own view, and they will look at that with infinite precision, with all the context and all the nuance. But then they'll go look at someone else and they'll remove all the nuance and textured data, and then they're like, oh, this is definitely pointing in this direction. And it's like, yeah, but if you would include more data, you would notice that it's not pointing at naked women.
Pointing that direction.
But there's also a problem in the opposite direction. And the opposite direction is this one, which no one made this image, and maybe we should make it after the podcast. But another problem is, imagine that it's a picture of the women in their entirety. They're completely, they're in their swimsuits and you can see it. But then imagine I make a tiny hole, tiny hole, like in one spot. And then someone goes, oh, because that hole's missing, this could mean anything. I have no idea what this image is. Like, wait a minute, just because that hole's missing, we can see what this is.
We can see what this is.
And so what people do is, because we're dealing in this continuum, what people do is they can run away into, okay, in a continuum, there's always a degree to which things are not well defined. And so there's always like a little hole. Like there's like a little hole to which things aren't defined within an argument or a concept. And so people, they will dive into that hole and we need to fill this hole.
Else.
Yeah, and validate everything else. We need to fill that hole. We can't be certain what this is until we fill that hole. And it's like, man, that hole is never filled. It would require infinite data to fill that hole. If you're just always diving into the nuance, like, oh, more context. Like, no, dude, we don't have infinite resources to spend all this time just dismissing the obvious.
Truth anyway, so I don't know what you're looking for.
There is no absolute truth. You're just escaping into your own bias. And I think this is where a lot of bias comes from, is that people do not understand coarse graining, and they do not understand continua and how continua function when arguing. Because, like I said, I've noticed a lot of times people, they create this bias where they think that I'm gonna examine your argument in low precision, identify something, say this is where you are, but then when it comes to my position, I want you to analyze it with infinite precision. It's like, well, if we're gonna discuss these things, we need to examine them at the same resolution. We have to.
Yeah, and I think that will kind of stop us from this whole thing that's really popular now, where people, see a story or see a video or whatever, and then automatically they're trying to create a whole different narrative around one specific thing in there. And like, hold on for a second. Let's back up, look at this whole picture, and actually come to terms with what we're looking at.
Yeah.
And it kind of goes to what we've been talking about the past couple of weeks about spirits, and how, it wasn't an accident that we chose that word.
Yes, exactly.
No, it wasn't. We were trying to point in a specific direction.
Yes.
We're trying to get you to think about a specific thing, think in a specific way. And then in doing that, we're able to kind of extrapolate and explain it, without, all of the, what's the word?
Woo. The woo, the supernatural.
We're able to explain it without the woo, and almost the same thing with the Colin Robinson character, to where the writers of that show were able to use this particular character to ground the show and kind of, make us really understand, when they're using the word vampires, they're creating this constraint, and this dude fits right in there.
And what it does is, when you then interact with someone in the real world who exhibits the behaviors of Colin Robinson, you can think vampire. Vampire are scary. Vampires are dangerous. Avoid the vampire.
They drain your life force.
They drain your life force.
And vampires are not handing out blood at the blood drives. Yeah, they're not doing that.
Yeah, they're here to take your essence at their own. They're here to gain something at your expense. You need to be wary of vampires. And so I was gonna say something before you brought up the Colin Robinson. It was
I was talking about spirits. And
the idea of spirits. Yeah, so, thanks, man. So the thing about the podcast is, the way I view it and what I conceptualize what we're doing is we are taking words that already have meaning. They point in a direction. Spirit does not point to bananas. It just doesn't. Spirits point to something else. I'm
trying to think of how spirit could point to bananas.
I'm sure there's a path, but typically spirits don't point to bananas. And so the spirit of a banana, I guess, but spirits don't point to bananas. And so with these words that have a history, they are stored on everyone's mind. There is mutual information for these words, and we know they objectively point one direction versus somewhere else. So if I'm trying to So if I'm trying to
start from there.
Yeah. So the way I see it is that if I'm trying to conceptualize a language, what I'm saying is, like, we are trying to take this word and go, all right, in our information theoretic framework, where does this point? What does this do in this context? And we try to use the existing context that word has. We're not just pulling it out of the air, as Oyani was saying. We're saying this already has existing context. So if I just shift the context slightly, so that it's still pointing in the direction that it points, but now it points in that direction with the additional constraint data of information and information theory. Now where does it point? And what I think is that it points in a direction that actually gives you a vast, really valuable way of conceptualizing reality. And one thing that I really appreciate about this word and kind of the word's ideas of spirits and gods and the information theoretic point of view is that, as you've heard in the podcast, everything that we've argued is based off of observation and how the universe evolved and measurement outcomes. And so as a physicist, I do not believe in supernatural things. I won't do that. I have to, things that can be verified through measurement. And so with that though, when I talk to religious people now and I start using, and I see how they use their words, it's like, okay, how much data can I extract out using my interpretation of spirit that doesn't have any supernatural stuff, and how much of what they're saying still comes through as something that can be understood and communicated. And what you find is that when you tune your mind to this frequency, what they're saying doesn't just come back to you as noise anymore. You can hear them.
You can
hear them now. And what they're saying isn't unreasonable. Now, here's the thing. I don't agree with everything they say because depending on the religious person you're talking to, the supernatural aspect is just something that can't be removed from it. And so sometimes it'll come away with like, okay, I can see what you're saying from here, but I don't agree with this part, but at least a communication has occurred. I can see your reality better than I could before. Yeah. And that's what I think is so valuable, because remember, we are trying to say that we're trying to build a language, a fair language. If you're not going to include concepts like spirits and gods in your language that's supposed to be fair, then it's like, how can you hear those people? How can those people use their data to enrich the system as a whole if we're just not even going to include their concepts? We're not even going to try to understand their concepts.
Especially when you come from a place where you appreciate that these concepts didn't just spring up out of the need for people to just they had nothing else to do. Well, I guess these are ideas and concepts that have been built on different layers of meaning over time. Yes. To emerge as this word. Like, we need to take that stuff seriously. Like, you can't just throw it away.
Exactly.
No, but we can go in and then, create a better resolution by defining more of the constraints in there and excluding the woo from it.
Yes.
And being able to say, when we distill this down, what else is the essence that's left? How much information is left when we remove all of the woo from it?
Yes.
What else is left?
And that's the thing, is like, what else is left? And that the thing, going back to Colin Robinson, is when you're trying to think of the word vampire, you have to think of it as a vector. You have to think of these constraints as vectors. Because remember, obviously they're vectors. They're pointing. What do vectors do? Vectors are literally how you designate points on a space. And so it all fits together quite nicely. Yeah. So these constraints are vectors, these symbols that are used to point in the direction of vampires. So we have to start thinking, okay, let's look at what is a vampire. If you had to describe this to someone who didn't know what it was, you would use things like, okay, they suck your essence out. What's a better word to know? Parasite. Parasite.
They drain you without giving you anything back.
Yes, they're evil. Yeah, they're usually
use
evil.
You up. They take from you.
Yes, they're usually there's the words like evil. There's the words like draining, parasite, and so. But then there's also supernatural. Supernatural is also a word that's
this
in
is
there.
How. Remember, it's not to break through what you're saying, but remember, just imagine that you are playing a crossword puzzle right now. Yeah. So all these words, if someone says, 5-letter word for vampire, and then these are the answers you're coming up with. Maybe 10-letter word, whatever. They're evil. Yeah. Parasite. So that's the process.
But here's the thing about vectors is that whenever you look at a vector and how they function, you have the coefficients that exist with the vector. And so the way vectors work is you have something called a basis vector, and then you have a coefficient, which tells you like how much of this point is associated with this basis vector. And so from the fourth episode, or one episode, I think it was the Speak Your Truth, I think, when we were talking about the corner of a room, where you have the corner of a room and you have the 3 lines where the walls, you have 3 lines that come from the walls and the ceilings meeting, and then you can say go down so much, go along one line so much and go along the other line so much. How much you go in each direction, those are the coefficients that then point to a position in the room. And so when I'm talking about the idea of vampire, then, you know, some coefficients like parasite, maybe parasite has the largest coefficient. Maybe if I remove the other words like supernatural, what if I remove supernatural and I'm still pretty much pointing in the same direction? Because the biggest word that describes the biggest thing that makes up most of the concept of vampire, maybe it's parasite, you know? And so this is, again, the idea of when we're trying to use this word spirit, we're trying to project out the supernatural. But if I were to just give you the word supernatural, how much does that constrain? How many things are consistent with supernatural? Is supernatural really hugely part of the essence of this word? And if you remove it, does a lot of the context of that word still remain? Like if I remove supernatural from vampire, does parasite still do most of the work? And so most of the essence is still there? Because if so, then getting rid of supernatural, all you've done is remove the constraint. So possibly you're still within the space of things that are consistent with vampire, but you're just pointing in a different location. There's supernatural vampire, there's not supernatural vampire, and I'm still in the space of vampire. And so in spirit, there's supernatural spirit, concept of spirit, and non-supernatural concept of spirit. Yep. If we remove the supernatural, is it still valid for us to call the thing a spirit? And our argument is yes, it is.
Is there still information in there? And what you've described is literally logo design 101. That's what you're saying.
Of course it is, bro.
What you're saying is, because what you're saying is that, look, when you come up with a design for someone, for a brand, for a product, whatever it is, the first thing you have to do is you look at it and say, how much information is in there, and then you start to break down the process to the process. Okay, what can I eliminate? And I do this a lot with my brother when we work together. It's like, what can we eliminate from this icon, from this logo, to where we still have enough information as possible? Because we want something that will be eye-catching and something that will send a message as soon as you see it. Yep. It will not, even if we shrink it down to size, all of the information is still in there. If we blow it up, the information is still in there. So if you imagine if we wanted to come up with a business now and we decided we wanted to put a pig, and then the name of the business will be the Pig House. Mm-hmm. Obviously, when you see it, you're thinking food now. It's something to do with food, but you're not sure, is it a farm?
Yeah.
It could be a pig farm. You don't know. But the moment I put a flame behind it, I'm already telling you exactly. We're talking about a cooked pig now. Yeah. So all that's kind of the process of saying, look, when you're handed this information, and like how we use the word spirit, when we pick that word, we're able to say, you know what, if we strip away all the woo from it, all the supernatural from it, is there still information in there that still explains succinctly what this word means?
Exactly. Yep.
Yeah.
And
that's all it is.
And it's all about resolution. It's about resolution, because now it's like, okay, well, I've gotten rid of constraints, so I've increased the number of things that are consistent with it, but now I'm working at a space of lower resolution. But, one of the biggest games that you have to play when conceptualizing is, at what resolution do I need to conceptualize this at? Because here's the thing. It costs resources to look at things at higher resolution. Sometimes you don't want to look at things with the highest resolution. And in fact, given the fact that there is an infinite regression, or the infinite regression problem, to where if you try to get absolute precision, which is absolute truth, then you are going to dump all of your resources in there forever. There isn't enough resources to fill that hole. So you have to actually think, okay, at what resolution? Is this sufficient? Is this sufficient data?
That's the same thing we're just talking about. So when you present a design to someone, or a logo or something, you don't want them to use as much resources trying to figure out what it is.
Exactly.
No, it should be so perfectly done to where you use it's all of the juice is just there. It's right there in front of you.
Yeah.
And so going back to the example we said earlier, where it was like, okay, so if you have just a pig and you say the pig house, could it be a farm? Could it be a pet and zoo? It could be whatever it is. Mm-hmm. You put a flame behind it. Okay, but then if you then decide to you put a plate underneath it, you put a fork, you put a guy eating on the side of it. It's like, so you show this to me, I'm like using all of this resource. Okay, what is this? You could have just put the pig and the flame right there, and all the information is right there in front of you.
Yeah.
And I think that's what we are trying to do with the whole spirit thing, to where we took that word, which points to a specific direction, saying, hey guys, look over here. But what if we take away all of this? This is what you see now.
Yeah. Where does it point now? It still points somewhere pretty relevant. It still doesn't point. It still doesn't point to burrito. So it's still useful.
It does not.
and the thing is another reason why I use this word is, I remember when I was in grad school, I always, I feel like I start off a lot of statements with things like that. Yeah. But it was at the beginning of grad school. And so my evolution was, I was raised Christian. By the time I became probably when I was around 21, 22, I became an atheist. And it was largely because when I was in high school, I remember that's when I first started questioning my religion, because I never had a bad experience with my religion. My parents, I didn't really have a problem with it. My biggest problem was it wasn't a big enough space for me to build a consistent model of reality. And I came to that realization in high school, where we took a world cultures class, and we went over Greek mythology, and it was like world religions. We're going over religions. And so we had a little section on Greek mythology. And I knew in middle school that I was taught that Greek mythology has Greek mythology in it. Like, everyone accepts this as mythology. When I realized in that class that this was an actual religion that people actually thought was just how reality was, I was like, wait a minute. If we accept for a fact that this was mythology now, and there was a group of people who lived who thought that this was true fact religion, how do I know my religion isn't myth and nonsense? So then I become obsessed with that question, and it literally took from like sophomore year of high school until I was like 21, so like 5 or 6 years just wrestling with this, until I was like, you know what, I need to tear down these walls, I need to deconstruct this so that I can go explore new concepts. So, and then I start exploring new concepts, and probably around grad school, I was still solidly an atheist all through grad school, but I was always an atheist because I said that I didn't think that any religious model was a good model of reality. Like, I couldn't understand them. And so, but one thing that I did know is I started developing something at the beginning of grad school that I called spiritual philosophies. And I used spiritual philosophies specifically. I wasn't saying that I believed in some like never-ending spirit, like I had some spirit forever or something like that. But I knew for a fact the reason why I used the word spirit even then was that your emotional state depends on what you think and what you do. And if you are suffering or you're not feeling good, you don't have control whether or not, you don't have direct control whether or not you're feeling angry, whether you're not feeling sad. So you have to make decisions that you can foresee. Okay, if I make these decisions, I can see that I'm going to go off a cliff over there, and I will probably start the suffering, and I'll be sad. So I need to come up with a set of philosophies, i.e. a way of living that nurtures my system so that my feelings don't make me suffer. And so I correlated the concept of the state of my feelings, which is something you don't have direct control over, with my spirit, like nurturing my spirit, so that whenever someone meets me, I'm in good spirits, I'm happy, I'm not suffering. And I kind of even then correlated those concepts together. And I remember talking to my friend Josh Booth, who was one of the people who I remember hanging around that really got me to like kind of go, all right, I'm an atheist. Like, he was one of the atheist people, and he's a really good friend of mine still. I remember telling him about that, and he was like, yeah, but why do you have to use the word spirit? Like, he didn't like the use of the word spirit because all the supernaturalness. And I'm like, I don't know, man. To me, it just seems like the best word to use. Like, my spiritual philosophies. How do I nurture and take care of my spirit? And so that's kind of where I'm coming from, and why this word to me is useful to use and meaningful. And of course, we had our whole episode Spirit and Waveforms that breaks down what exactly we mean when we say that word. What exactly
spirit is, yeah. And I think overall, we're just trying to go through this process of explaining, why this word, because I think I've probably had 2 people ask me specifically why we chose that. My sister had asked me the same thing. And, I went through the explanation entirely. This is, a perfect word to kind of guide you in the space of ideas to what we're thinking about.
Yes, exactly.
And, this really, I'm trying to think of another word. I don't know.
It's the best word. It's the best word to use. That's why. It's the best word because we're trying to point you in that direction. We're not trying to point you at
specific direction.
Yeah, we're not trying to point you at nachos. I must be hungry.
It's great. I think if you guys have some time, check out that TV show or the movie. I think the movie doesn't have Colin Robinson in it, but the TV show has. I think probably like the first 4 episodes, you should kind of get a vibe of who Colin Robinson is and see.
Yeah, I love that character. Besides, don't even just watch it for Colin Robinson. That show is brilliant overall.
It's a brilliant show.
I love that show.
And what I love about the show is that it's consistent. Like, I always want to like poke holes in the world that they built, where these people live in, and how they interact with like outside. Like, I always want to find this, but they're pretty consistent.
They're pretty good,
they
man.
Keep it tight.
It's really tight. Yeah, I love that show, and I'm a huge fan of Matt Berry. I
love Matt Berry.
Matt Berry's hilarious.
Laszlo.
Like,
I love it.
When I first saw him on the IT Crowd, like his shtick, man, like it's solid. The whole overacting, like the British sophisticate kind of overdoing it.
Yeah, he's a great actor, and his show is also great. What's that show?
Toast of London.
Toast of London is brilliant.
I still think of that episode where Ray Purchase, that his rival, and he remember that episode where his roommate had that Nigerian woman that was coming to visit, and she had that plastic surgery, and she got that batch plastic surgery under Ray Purchase's pseudonym Beavis Fuffoon. I still think about that. I just walk around thinking about that word sometimes and start laughing.
It's brilliant. It's a well done show. Yeah, he's a great actor, guys. If you have a moment, just check it out. I'm probably gonna go back now and watch Stephen Toast all over again.
Oh yeah, I watched that recently. It holds up, man.
It still holds up. It's pretty good. Yeah.
Yes, I can hear you, Clan Fandango.
And I feel like that was the best shtick in the whole thing. Every time he went in that booth, because by the second season, you start to ask yourself, why does he keep going here? Like, what he's going? Because then you really have to ask, like, are they playing a prank on him? Is he getting paid for this?
I love that character because he's so sincere. He's not just a buffoon. He's pretty sincere, and half the time,
believes in everything he's doing.
Yeah, and half the time he's not. He's not trying to be an asshole, but he rubs people the wrong way. It's just a really well balanced character. Like, I really love it.
Well balanced character. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that guy. All right, well, I think it's time to wrap it up. If I do say so myself.
Oh yes, we can do some plugs now, guys. But yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed some of the things we talked about today. If you have any questions, concerns, or you disagree, hit us up on social media at the Bottom Turtle Podcast. We are on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. We also have a Reddit page, the Bottom Turtle. You can leave us comments on there, or just leave us a comment in the review section on the app. And like always, retweet, share, and recommend this podcast to your friends. And
definitely reach out. We really appreciate it when Christoph reached out, and we have some people reach out every once in a while and
reach out, and ask questions. Yeah, we love.
You get to win a question asked, we will discuss it, and we'll be more than happy to discuss whatever it is whatever ideas you want. Be a part of the podcast.
If it's a brand new thing, we want to hear it. We want to challenge our own ideas and improve on them and get them to be better.
Yep. All right.
At the end of the day, guys, join us as we grow this podcast, and
stay turtling, my friends.
Right. Bye, guys.
Peace.